Sorry about that. So yeah, they can either send out the Zoom link to the family or they can ask the family to come in person, and it's the family's choice. They are finding that they are able to meet with more families by using the video chat option, just because it might be more convenient if somebody doesn't have to leave work in order to be able to attend that meeting. The same with parent conferences. And I agree as well. It's wonderful to not have to leave work to be able to have the same meeting, especially because conferences are so short. So to, have to plan to leave work for an hour for a 15-minute conference can pose challenges for people. But we can have that same video conferencing capability with Microsoft Teams.
And again, a parent just clicks on something and it just flows. They
Mhm.
don't have any software installed. It just flows.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yep. I don't know any of the other technical parts of it. Bruce will be able to answer those questions for you, but he said, we could do one of these meetings. We could do one of these committee meetings on Teams too, just so you guys can see more how it works. If that would
be good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll need to do that after January 1st, right?
No, our agreement with Zoom is all the way through the end of this school year.
Oh.
Yeah, because we're on the fiscal school year, not the calendar.
Okay.
Yeah. So we do still have it all the way through the end of this year, but we're already planning ahead for next year and just making sure that we know what funding runs out for which products when, so that we've got next plan in place.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions about either the tech carts or the Zoom?
I'd love us to be able to have a demonstration of the carts after everybody gets used to them a little bit. Maybe that'd be good for a workshop.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll pass that along. All right, well, I'm going to jump into the data. Brad, as I was sharing at the beginning here, I only have until 4 because then I've got to scoot off. There's a Q&A for a new grant that I think I mentioned at the last board meeting that we were going to be applying for our high at-risk youth. And it starts right at 4. So I've got data because the focus today is proficiency. So I'm going to share our fall data with you and talk through some of the trends that I'm seeing. This is really baseline data for this year, so I can't speak to any growth until we have our spring data, and I'll definitely do that in June like I did last year. But I can show you how the data is shaping up as baseline data, and I do have a few comparisons that I've put together for you as well. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to start with our iReady math data. We give an iReady math diagnostic 3 times a year. The first time is in the fall, and then the winter, and then the spring. And this year, we gave the diagnostic to grades K through 8, because as you remember, we purchased the Ready Classroom and iReady software for grades 6 through 8 this year as a full implementation year. So they did the diagnostic as well. And I found the data really interesting, especially for 6th grade. So I'm going to show you the current year. Oh, it's probably going to make me log back in because I logged in a little while ago. There we go. So this is the current year, the most recent diagnostic. This is what I would expect to see in a normal year, is a little bit of green at the beginning of the year, which means we have a few students who are above grade level, a few students who are already on grade level. Even though this is really early in the year, this diagnostic is given within the first few weeks of the school year, like the first 2 to 4 weeks of the school year. So what you really expect to see is a lot of students in this yellow, which means they're 1 grade level below. So for example, if it's a 2nd grader taking this assessment, the very first or 2nd week of the school year, they're probably not proficient with 2nd grade material yet. You would expect them to be proficient with 1st grade material, which means they're going to be in the yellow category. So yellow isn't bad. It just means we know that we need to fill that yellow. We need to move that yellow. By the end of the year, we're hoping to see that most of this yellow is green. We want to see 50% of our students up here in this green section. And just to refresh your memories, last year we did see that. So by the spring, we hope to see that green bar move so that we've got at least 50% of our students in the green on or above grade level. And then this yellow moves and this red gets teeny tiny. It's exactly what you want to see in the spring. So that's what we're hoping to see this coming spring as well. But let me just show you again that this is what our current data looks like. And then as you scroll down, you can see the data by school. So Ash Point Community, we've got a pretty good chunk of kids already here in the green at or above grade level. A large number here that are one grade level below, but again, that doesn't really mean they're below. That means they're ready for learning for this current school year. And then we've got a couple kids here in the red that does mean that they're either 2 grade levels below or 3 or more grade levels below. So this red is concerning. But you can see it's a little larger in some schools than in others. What's interesting is this is the middle school's very first year with this program. So what I'm expecting to see over the next few years is that even in the fall, that this red gets smaller because the students are going to become more proficient with using the math program. And what I thought was interesting is if I show these results by grade, you're not going to see any red in kindergarten, and you're not going to see the dark red in first grade because kindergarten students can't be 2 years below kindergarten, and students in first grade can't be 3 or more years below first grade. But ideally, you want to see this green bar growing over the years as students become more proficient. And you start to see that in this trend. And again, this is our fall data. I'm really excited to see our spring data, but you can start to see that this data is growing. There's a blip here with 5th grade. And if you remember back over the past, I think I've been saying this for 2 years now, going on, this is my 3rd year. This group of students have been hit the hardest with the pandemic in terms of their math scores. They have not caught up to where we would expect them to be at this point. And I've got some other data to show you that as well, but these were the same 4th graders last year that I was talking about, that there's that little blip in the data. This is national. This is not just our school. These are the students who were in 2nd grade when we had to leave our learning in March and we had to move online for our learning. And there was a period of time where we were not introducing new instruction. And for that period of time where we were not introducing new instruction, there was a lot of math instruction that was really important to tee up those students for multiplication and division, which starts in 3rd grade. And so those students didn't have that preparation and readiness. So again, we're seeing the same blip that we're seeing at a national level. I've had conversations with our iReady trainers about this data specifically. We have all the right supports in place for these students in terms of how we're using this programming. It differentiates. We are seeing growth in these students. They're just not where we would expect them normally to be in terms of proficiency. But what's interesting is look where these 6th graders are. So there's a little bit of a blip here with 5th grade, but normally what we've seen in our middle school data is the middle school data in the past, when we used to use 2 different programs across the district for elementary school, and then they would encounter yet a different program in middle school, our data would decrease in 6th grade, decrease even more in 7th grade, and even more in 8th grade. Now that we're using a consistent program, it's interesting to see that this 6th grade group has sort of stayed where we would expect them to be. And my hope again is that we continue to see this green line growing through their 6th grade year. And then over the next few years, seeing these seeing this growth extend more in 7th grade and even more in 8th grade. Because now it's all one consistent program, not only across the district, but also K through 8. So I think we're set up really well, and I'm excited to see what growth we're going to see from here. The other piece that I wanted to show you really quick before we move on to NUIA data is in the 2021-2022 school year, in the fall, we did not have grades 6th, 7th, and 8th grade using the program last year, so they're not included in the fall data. But you can see that some of these green areas were a little bit smaller last fall, and the red areas, especially in some of these, like, you know, our 4th grade, that was, those are current 5th graders this year, and they're the more problematic group again across the nation. These red areas were larger than what we're seeing our data show this year. So that's also showing improvement. Even though I don't have the full growth of the fall to spring data, when I look fall to fall, I'm seeing improvement from last fall, which was a full implementation year for K-5, to this fall. I can go back one more year, but it's not a full set of data. These teachers were piloting during this school year. So these were not all of our, we didn't have all of our kindergarten teachers. It was only 2 of our schools. So this data isn't quite as accurate. We're not really comparing apples to apples here. Oops, and that's the final diagnostic. So it's definitely not apples to apples. So the 2020-2021 school year, that was the first COVID year that was really funky, but we were piloting a brand new math program. Well, this was what our fall diagnostic looked like that year. So really looked pretty funky. This was that problematic group. Remember, these were our kids who missed the last part of their 2nd grade school year. And granted, they did get some learning online. It was not the same as what they would have received in person. And it did affect that group. They didn't have any students in the piloting group that were at grade level at the start of their 3rd grade year. So pretty interesting to look at this data over time. I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing. And I think overall teachers seem to like the program because it's providing a level of supports and differentiation for their students. I'm hearing good things from the middle school. They have a second training that's coming up this Wednesday afternoon. And they want to learn more about how do I make all of the online My Path elements work for the students, and make sure that they're able to set goals based on their data and able to see their own growth. So they've got some really good questions. Any questions about the new math iReady diagnostic data before I jump into the NUIA data?
Well, Stephanie, you said you're encouraged. So you're encouraged because?
Because this data from our current year, this fall data is showing this trend line of continuous growth. Okay. And I'm really looking to see that there's more yellow and green than there is red, because eventually what happens, let me just jump backwards for a minute. This was last spring. What we want to see by the end of the school year is that at least 50%, if not more, of the students are at or above grade level. That's the goal. You want to get 50% of your students at or above grade level. Of course, the more, the better. And then when I look at our data, I see that most grade levels were able to get pretty close to that point, even despite some of the issues that we've seen with that 4th grade, again, who are now 5th graders this year. Yeah, and those are grade levels overall. That's across the entire district. We can also look at this data by school, and we see some pretty promising results there.
What do you think happened in the minds of the second graders then, where we went completely remote at the end, that caused them to be still struggling.
So if you remember back in March of 2020, when we first went remote, we got everybody connected, but not every student had a hotspot. So there was not equity there. We also did not have student IEPs set up to provide new learning. So we were not offering, it was maintenance of instruction. And as a district, that is all that we said that teachers were allowed to do. They could not provide new instruction until after April break. So if you think
it's
about
just
that, it's almost, I'm trying to think, it was probably about a month's worth of maintaining, but teachers are introducing new instruction every day in school.
Yeah, no, I understand all that without question. It's the fact that it was second graders, right? There's something developmentally
Yes, so developmentally
interesting and challenging about our kids going through our school system. And they're like, it's like not getting enough food when you're at a certain age and your body doesn't grow after that like it would typically or something.
Well, it's a big cognitive leap from moving from addition and subtraction to using all four of the operations. So even if you think about when your students first learn to multiply and divide, that's a big leap from addition and subtraction. And so that preparation at the end of second grade year to prepare students for those operations and groups and the arrays and the mental models and the strategies, all of those foundational supports were not put into place. And I know there's many schools of thought on how multiplication is learned, but research says it is not learned through memorization. So you can memorize as much as you want to, but developmentally, and we found this as a district as well, as we were going through the process of making the selection on the program that we wanted to use, we really were ensuring that those key foundational skills that help to build instruction over time, the math strategies, the mathematical practices and thinking, that all of those really strong foundational skills were built into the program. Because when those pieces are missing, the rest of it falls apart for the kids. And that is what's happening with that group.
Lauren, I could jump in a little bit as a former elementary school principal. I think there's something that is really unique about the third grade year, and John might be able to chime in on this based on his experience as well. Whenever you try to do multi-age groups, I found it very easy to do first and second grade together or fourth and fifth grade together. I never was able to find ways that the third grade could work with the second grade or the fourth grade because there's such a developmental leap that happens that year for some reason. And so that might attribute to some of this as well, that when they miss that particular year in that particular, your analogy for food at a certain developmental phase, I think is apt because I think if you miss that key year, it's really hard to catch up for some reason. The third grade is really important that way. I would also add to Stephanie's earlier point, there's a lot of research right now and a lot of articles that are coming out from anywhere from the Times to the Globe and other newspapers and other educational journals that are showing an interesting correlation between what students were not, the gaps that students had due to the pandemic, and a direct correlation to poverty levels. And that speaks to access to technology, it speaks to hotspots, it speaks to all those things, supervision if they have two working parents who aren't able to be there for the kids, if they're really struggling with other things. The school as a safe haven wasn't there during that year. And so those students were disproportionately adversely impacted by the pandemic if they were struggling with some issues associated with poverty. So districts that are higher percentage of free and reduced lunch are really having to play much more of a catch-up game now than other districts around the country. So that's another thing for us to just be aware of in terms of that correlation.
Okay. Yeah, got it.
Do we have a sense of the demographics of that particular class of what is now fifth graders relative to what Brad was just saying about some of that research with the correlation between socioeconomics and development or access to the curriculum, just in terms of like a secondary piece of data that would be helpful as we're moving forward, probably with curriculum?
Well, first of all, the curriculum supports are in place for that group. They are showing growth. When you look at this data over the past few years, they are making gains. They're not making gains as quickly to get them back to where they were. I have a data chart from NUIA to show you. I'm not sure how possible that was. A few years ago, I put together a report for the board that showed, I think it was called conditional COVID. It wasn't COVID loss, but it was sort of around that same idea. It was a conditional report that basically was a predictive model based on their 2019 fall NUIA score compared to their 2020 fall NUIA score, a prediction of how long it would take them to get back on track. And that group had a predictive model that showed it was going to take them a significant amount of time to get back on track. The NUIA report that I pulled for you is sort of looking back on that. I don't have the conditional report. I could send it to you if you're really interested, but it's a comparative model of the fall of 2019, where students were, where we were as a district of proficiency in both literacy and math in the fall, and then where we are as a district with math and literacy in the fall currently. And are we at or above where our scores were in the fall of 2019? And it's with the same cohort group. I've tracked all of that data by cohort. So the current fifth graders, you can see when they took this assessment in 2019, you can see what gains they have or have not made in that actual comparison. So the first conditional report was a guess of where they would be. Now we do have our socioeconomic status by school, and our schools that are lower socioeconomic school buildings don't necessarily have all of the lower scores, and it doesn't mean that they're not making gains at the same rate. It's what we're finding is it's more pockets of students, and it really depends on what kinds of supports those pockets of students had, not just poverty overall. Should I jump into the NUIA report?
Please.
Okay. All right. So this is, all of this data is on one big, huge cohort study, just so that you have the big picture. I think every time I share this data with you, I show you this overall chart that we have. I just basically go through and change the class, change their grade level because they go up a grade every year. And then this just has all of their NUIA assessments that they've ever taken as a cohort of students. And one of the things that I can do with this data is I always look at the previous score and see, has the score gone down? We have a really weird trend in our district where our scores go up in the fall, and then sometimes they drop a little lower in the spring, and then they go up and then they drop. I think we're mowing the lawns when we're giving the NUIA assessments, and it just smells like summer. And the kids, I don't know what it is about those spring assessments, or you know, maybe it's the time of year. I think it's hard to give an assessment at the end of May, but that's state mandated now. That's the time frame that we're given. But oftentimes, so any score that's in black is an improvement from the previous time that the students took the assessment. And then any red is a drop in the score from the previous time that they took the assessment. And I'm tracking the same group of students. I am no longer tracking language usage. We only were required to give that for 1 year. We're not using the data, so we are not requiring that students take the extra time to do that assessment. So we are just back to measuring math and reading through the NUIA assessment. I track this data as a full district so that you can see in some of my charts, I have grades 2, 3, 4, and 5 all together as a district, which tells one story. But then I also have them all separated because, again, we have small schools, we have large schools, we have higher poverty schools, we have 2 schools that are kind of similar sizes, but one has a much larger special education population. So a lot of different variables across our schools. So it's important to look at that data separately. And then, of course, the schools want their separate data as well. But what I did this time is I went through our data and I did a pre-COVID to post-COVID assessment with the same cohort of students. So I will start with this one. Actually, no, I'm not going to start with that one because that is spring to fall. I will start with this one. So this data shows the whole thing on the screen here. Yeah, that's the whole thing. This data shows our math score for this same group of students. These 3rd grade students would have taken this assessment, I think, when they were in kindergarten. Because yes, our current 3rd graders were kindergartners when COVID happened. So in the fall of 2019, they were in kindergarten, they took the assessment. I sort of take this data with a grain of salt because a beginning of the year kindergartner taking this assessment, they always, NUIA even suggests just be a little leery of your data. It's their first time taking any type of a computer adapted assessment. So I have their math scores for the fall. It's the lighter blue score. And then their math scores for the fall of 2022, which is the one that they just took as 3rd graders, is here. Reading score for the fall of 2019, again, these were kindergartners, versus their reading score for the fall of 2022. Now, I don't take this to mean that they've had a bunch of learning loss from kindergartners to 3rd grade. I would read this more as this was probably an unusually high number for our kindergartners taking this assessment. Because the other thing that happens with this assessment, especially in reading, it goes from reading the assessment to them in kindergarten. By 2nd grade, they're reading it on their own. So there's going to be a little bit of a data discrepancy. That's also part of why we stopped giving the kindergarten and 1st grade assessment, because regardless of where you stop that reading to them and they're reading on their own, you see a cliff in the score. So a little bit of a data discrepancy there, but you can see improvement there from math. Our current 4th graders who were 1st graders when they first took this assessment, again, you've got to read the data with a little bit of a grain of salt, but you do see some areas where it's either a very similar score or you're going to see a jump in improvement. 5th graders. This is our group that we've been paying closer attention to. Now, this data was interesting. It showed that decrease in math. They weren't super high up there to begin with, and we do see a little less than a 10-point difference there. That's a pretty significant decline in what we would want to see for that score. Again, I would want to see it the same or much higher. But in reading, we saw an increase. So it's math for that group. Now, the interesting thing is it was math and reading. When these students were in 3rd grade, and I think you saw that diagnostic assessment, and there was no green. It looked like no student was on grade level. Their NUIA data was similar to that in the fall of 2020 when they took this assessment, and in the spring of 2021 when they took this assessment. And now we're not seeing as much of that gap. So my theory is with the supports that we're providing, over time, we're going to see that gap close as well. I think the other benefit for this group is they're not then going to hit a cliff when they go into 6th grade and encounter a whole new math program. They're going to keep on keeping on with their same math program, consistent language of instruction for the next 3 years, because they now have the same math program in the middle school. So I think that will be a big benefit to help close that math gap. Sixth grade, we see an increase in math. We see a slight increase in reading. Seventh grade, slight increase in math, slight little dip in reading. Same with eighth grade. They had a little dip in math as well. Ninth grade, large increase in math score and large increase. Again, this is the fall of 2019 versus the fall of 2022. We had a nice increase there in their reading literacy score as well. A little bit of a dip for 10th graders, a bigger dip for literacy for 10th graders.
Why do we think that is for the 10th graders? That's distressing.
Well, I think these 10th graders had a difficult transition year last year. If you think about last year, these kids were freshmen. Their 8th grade year, they had a hybrid year and they missed part of their 7th grade year. So some pretty crucial middle school years and then a transition year that maybe didn't have the supports that a regular year would have provided to those students. So you think about transition is a step up day and it's, you know, activities that are really geared to help students to make a smooth transition into high school. A lot of those activities weren't able to take place because of COVID, and we're cohorting students and we're trying to keep everybody separate so that we're not, you know, having to do a ton of contact tracing and, you know, spreading disease from one school to the other. So that's one theory. A behavior and attendance was a big challenge for this group as freshmen last year. I would say both of those factors likely contribute to what we're seeing for scores here.
Okay,
Now,
that makes sense.
yeah, and my understanding is we're not seeing those same behaviors and we are seeing some improvement in attendance this year. So my hope is that's enough to sort of even us back out, but that's my theory about that particular group.
Thanks.
Did they not get the same sort of benefit of the freshman academy because it was that kind of year last year, do you think?
I think they benefited from having freshman academy versus not having freshman academy. But I think the challenge was our students really were not prepared to be freshmen last year.
Okay.
Our freshmen were much more like 8th graders. And
Okay.
I think most teachers that I talked to between middle and high school said that same thing, that the grade level that they were teaching felt like the grade level below, behavior wise, maturity wise, maybe academic wise as well, you know, just in terms of readiness. And I think part of that was the hybrid schedule.
Stephanie, what would you hope, like, what's the goal, not hope, but what's the goal of these numbers by the end of the year? So what percentage of increase are you anticipating or working towards?
We usually want to see about a 2% increase for each of these areas. My personal goal is I want to see all of these areas at least 60% or higher. I think it's an awfully lofty goal to say 70% or higher, although that would be wonderful as well. But 60% or higher is very reasonable when you're talking. So think about the previous band that I showed you, and I said that they suggest that half of that is green. That half is students being proficient and on grade level. So that's 50%. In NUIA, I want to see 60%. I really want to see that we're more than half of our students would be considered proficient.
What's the state median of that? Like, what's the average of proficiency across the state for these numbers?
I can find that for you. I don't have it right off the bat, but there is I can't remember what it's called. There's a document that has the 50th percentile for every single grade level. And that 50th percentile is what the average would be for all of these grade levels. So I don't have that right at my fingertips, but I could send it to you if you want to see it.
Stephanie, I'm going to give you a time thing here. You got 5 minutes.
Okay. The thing about the state and how they're measuring proficiency, I can't answer that right now because they're not measuring proficiency on this assessment. So if you were to look at our state data, I think the last data that they had posted on our data dashboard showed us as like 85 to 90% proficient, which isn't accurate. That's not how we look at proficiency. We look at students who are at the 50th percentile or higher in terms of their proficiency-based score that's measured nationwide. And that's their RIT score. That's what's used on that continuum. Every grade has an average score. If the student is scoring average or higher, we consider them to be proficient. I honestly am not totally clear on what Maine was using as their proficient score. They did send me some information. I couldn't make a lot of sense out of it, neither could my curriculum colleagues, and they're changing their proficiency measure this spring, and they're moving to more of what they're calling a through-year assessment, which means their spring assessment is going to look different than what we were measuring in the fall, and they're going to try to measure grade level proficiency. I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like or how that's going to change our data, but likely it will change our data. Yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to compare our spring data to what we currently have in the fall.
This is sort of an open-ended question, not something we can address in 3 minutes, but there seems to be these two factors, one that we can't control, pandemics and other things that are sort of beyond our realm of control. Then there are other things that we can control in terms of getting to some of those goals that you're identifying, Stephanie. And I think a lot of it, and what we're not talking about really, is instructional quality. And I'm wondering if there's any sort of correlation between some of the trends that you're seeing and the teams that are actually implementing the curriculum and the quality of instruction that the students are getting in terms of student engagement or ability to really get students excited about learning in these areas. And I imagine that's a conversation you're having with principals, and maybe you're having with your curriculum specialists, but I do think it's something that we need to pay attention to if we want to try to achieve the goals that you're setting. And obviously it's something that probably has the most direct correlation between what students are doing on these tests and the goals that we're hoping to achieve in the future.
Yeah. What are you asking? Are you meaning like with the ready implementation, the ready math implementation and the bookworms pilot that we're doing? Is that what you mean?
No, I'm really talking about how effective are our teachers in the district. Is every minute counting in the classroom? Are they doing things that are really engaging students around their interests? So they're really trying to make connections to real world applications to what they're learning in the classrooms. All the things that I imagine the NEAS team identified at the high school as possible goals, and other things that we all know as educators to be true, is that if we have really engaged students who are deeply excited about learning and come to school ready for that, then you're going to see these scores improve to the levels that they wouldn't if they weren't. So I think it's probably the most significant thing that we can look at as a district is how effective our teachers are being in the classroom when they're interacting with students.
Yeah. So we do evaluate our teachers and have an evaluation tool. If that's something that you would want to take a look at the tool, we can't share evaluation data.
No, I'm not asking for that. I'm just thinking that should be front and center in terms of achieving the goals that you're setting. I think it's just something we need to really think about. And I'm not saying that we as board members, I'm saying we as a district,
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have a whole process for providing our teachers with feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the teacher evaluation model we're following right now, which is based on the work of Robert Marzano, is probably one of the best ones, if not the best that I've ever seen. It's very relevant. It's goal-oriented. It's supportive. It focuses heavily on goal setting with the teachers and following up on those goals like we do with administrators. So absolutely, I agree with you, Brad. It's probably one of the most important things, if not the most important thing that we do.
Yeah, and I like the Marzaro model a lot. I agree with you. It's probably one of the best ones out there. It's just a question of, here's a question. are we providing our administrators enough time to get into the classrooms to help teachers grow professionally, to get them to really be better at their craft? And I think that's one investment I would love to see us really consider going forward, especially because, you know, I share Stephanie's goals. I'd love to see these go up in a really wonderful way. And I think that probably the best, you know, bang for our buck will be to invest in professional growth for our teachers and helping them to be more effective in the classroom.
Yeah, that's one of the arguments I made when we went to hire another assistant principal at the high school.
Yep.
Absolutely. There's never enough time. That's my answer. I'd love to see more time.
I
for
just want to say
administrators.
briefly, Stephanie, just thank you for all your hard work, putting all this stuff together, keeping up to date, obviously informing us, but I know it's a heck of a lot of hard work that you put into this and others too, but thank you.
We need to quickly talk about when the next meeting is. I agree with you, Lauren. Stephanie always does such a great job, but she's got to go.
Thank
So-
you, I have to scoot. And I would love to cancel the meeting in December and pick this back up in January, probably. I would suggest Monday, January 23rd, because the previous Monday is a holiday. So that puts us the fourth Monday in January. And I'd love to go back to the beginning and go back to the pathways lens. And I'm hopeful that I might be able to bring Molly Staples to potentially have a few interns speak at the meeting about some of the things that they did during their semester with Molly for their internships.
Sounds good to me.
Does that work for
Everybody else
everybody?
okay with the 23rd?
Right.
It's all good.
Okay. Okay, Stephanie, you better hop off and get to your other meeting, and everyone, thank you for coming today, and we'll see everybody at the meeting on Wednesday.
Great, thank
Great.
you. I apologize. I
Thanks,
had to cut it
everyone.
short.
Bye.
See ya.